Well, as we prepared to depart Brisbane, it was a glorious day, as you could see, glass out conditions, and then we departed the Manly Marina on our way to Cairns. Our first stop for the night would be a 58 nautical mile run, and that is up until Mooloolaba. We made our way out of Moreton Bay, and in the background there, as you can see, would be Caloundra, and so finally a small swell, nothing to be too concerned about. You've got the Glasshouse Mountains in the background there, and Caloundra Headland right in front. We have a nice light sea breeze. We then entered into Mooloolaba, across the bar, quite an uneventful bar crossing, and as you can see, again, it was a glorious evening, and that's our anchorage for the night. We then departed at first light and left the Mooloola River as we have beautiful conditions, and we're just making our way out of the river. A few fishing boats were also heading out with us. We travelled along the river, and again we had a wonderful bar crossing. Very flat conditions, and very grateful for the conditions. As you can see there, that's the Mooloolaba entrance, and that's the bar, and absolutely nothing at all. We had about 3.8 metres of water below the keel on our trip out, and as we departed the Mooloola River, we had a very slight long swell and almost no breeze, perfect conditions. We continued north, and then we began to see the entrance to the Wide Bay Bar. That's a screenshot of the plotter. We commenced our run in across the Wide Bay Bar, and once again we had absolutely ideal conditions for bar crossing. Very few broken waves, a little bit rolly because the Wide Bay Bar, you have the swell on your beam a lot of the way. Anyway, we got inside the Sandy Straits. That's the part of Fraser Island on the southern tip, and then the weather only got better and better as we made our way to our anchorage that evening. The following day we woke again to glorious conditions, and we started to make our way towards Bundaberg, crossing Hervey Bay. Winds. There was a strong wind warning forecast. At the beginning of the trip we had approximately 15 to 20 knots of wind and very little swell, but as the day progressed the weather worsened, and we just continued on to Pancake Creek. Nothing that upset this boat. It is an 18.5 tonne vessel, and we just punched through it and made our way to Pancake Creek for the night. Bundaberg into open water, nice blue water. We had the sea behind us. We're on our starboard quarter, again about 15 to 20 knots with a sea of about 2 metres, and we just continued travelling north at this distance at about 7.5 to 8 knots until we got to Pancake Creek. Later that afternoon we arrived at Pancake Creek, very sheltered and lovely anchorage, also a very popular camping spot, and this was our anchorage for the night. In the morning we departed Pancake Creek to continue to head north, and unfortunately the weather had deteriorated. So we decided to make our way into Gladstone. Quite a busy port, and we took up a marina berth in Gladstone for the night, and we also got some more provisions and a few more spares for on board, refueled, and headed off again. In the morning we then rose early and decided to go inside of Curtis Island and through an area called the Narrows. It's quite a shortcut rather than going back out through the lead, through the shipping channel and on the outside of Curtis. We decided to go inside. So whilst travelling upstream, we've got all the ships. These ferries that you can see primarily just transport workers about the place to the various mine sites and shipping ports. They have coal in Gladstone and also liquid gas. So that's one of the gas plants there. That's part of Curtis Island. And we've got a very busy shipping port, and that's one of the LNG vessels taking on their cargo. This is part of the Narrows. That area there is actually dry on low tide, and that's a cattle crossing, also dry, and they can get cattle across. Once we got to the top of Curtis Island, we get into open water, still quite dirty. As you can see on the chart to the right is the top of Curtis. And then we start to get back out into open sea. We then made our way north again to our next anchorage for the night, which was Great Keppel Island. On approach, we couldn't anchor at the popular area where there's a cafe, but we did anchor on the northern side of the island due to the southeast winds. We also deployed the stabilisers at this anchorage, mainly to test them out to see how they would perform, and quite successful. The next morning we departed Great Keppel Island and travelled north to an anchorage called Pearl Bay. The strong wind warning had continued to blow. We were now getting close to 30 knots of southeast wind with a 2 to 3 metre swell, and unfortunately we had pretty rough conditions, not pleasant for cruising, however nothing that this boat couldn't handle. So we continued on and we reached Pearl Bay, about a 60 nautical mile run, by 4 p.m. that afternoon. After a day of heavy seas, we then finally arrived at Pearl Bay, a beautiful protected anchorage for the night. Just a light breeze to hold the boat steady, but a nice hot shower, a nice cooked meal, and a reset, and all was ready to go for the next day. We departed Pearl Bay and travelled north, and we didn't get terribly far. The strong wind warning had persisted for 3 days now, and as a result we decided to take some shelter into an area called Island Head Creek. So this is at the anchorage now at Island Head Creek. The conditions were even too rough to even video on our travel up. Boat was heeling a lot. There was a lot of salt spray around. We probably had gusts to 40 knots with 3 metre swell. So we decided to cut the day short and come into Island Head Creek, just for safety mainly, but also just to have a break from these terrible conditions. As a result, we ended up staying in Island Head Creek for 3 days because of the strong wind warning just being persistent. And by now it was day 6 of the strong wind warning, and the seas had built quite strong. So we decided to stay here until the strong wind warning was cancelled before we would leave Island Head Creek and make our way further north. Whilst we were at anchor at this creek, we still had gusts of 50 knots over the deck, and it caused a slight bit of damage or tearing to the bimini. We secured the boat as best we could, and we were just so pleased that the anchor held beautifully and we didn't drag at all in those 3 days. Once the strong wind warning was cancelled, we departed Island Head Creek, travelled north to the Duke Island group. Quite an interesting area, beautiful islands, and the wind was still blowing a little bit, 20, 25 knots occasionally. The swell had decreased, and as we travelled further north, the protection of the Great Barrier Reef became very evident. As you can see by the weather conditions here, there was plenty of wind about, but again, nothing that this boat couldn't handle. This is on approach to the Duke Islands. There is cattle and goats on these islands, and we found a beautiful protected anchorage on the north side of the Duke Islands, and it was just a wonderful anchorage, and again, very pleasant, good holding, and a lovely beach to take the tender for a run in. In the morning we rose to some gorgeous weather and we departed the Duke Island group, and our next port for the day would be Mackay. It was quite a long run, I believe 78 nautical mile run, but it was well worth it. The weather, once that strong wind warning had disappeared, the weather had become beautiful, and as we passed Hay Point, popular shipping areas, we took up a berth at Mackay Harbour, and we went out for dinner, we refuelled, we got some more provisions and had a very relaxing evening there. After a wonderful night at Mackay Marina, we then departed early in the morning and with again glorious weather, and we're excited to head towards the Whitsunday Island group. We were then going to troll and fish around the Whitsunday Island group, and our intention was to anchor, which we did, at Whitehaven Beach, a very popular anchorage for the night, and it was quite a rewarding anchorage to be there, and I hope to return one day. So we departed the beautiful Whitehaven beach the next day and travelled north to an island called Holburn Island. This is approximately off the Cape Upstart area, which is about 70 to 80 nautical mile south of Townsville. It's just inside the shipping channel, and whilst we were travelling along there, we decided to also have a fish, and we actually spotted a wreck on the chart, and we went to investigate, and we were quite surprised with the amount of fish that were being held on this particular little wreck. We also had an opportunity to open up the engines, the throttles, give it some full noise for a while, blow out some cobwebs, and stretch her legs in the calm conditions.
Look at that!
So after we completed a short stint on that isolated wreck, quite successful little fishing session, we then proceeded further north and into the port of Townsville. We decided to stay in Townsville for the night. Once again, we got some fresh provisions and refueled for pretty much our last leg from Townsville up to Cairns. We decided to take the route inside Hinchinbrook Channel, and we proceeded about 3/4 of the way along the channel and decided to have an anchorage there that night. Whilst it's nice and calm, it was a little bit humid and overcast, of course. Welcome to the far north Queensland. However, the place was alive with midges, and we had to have some coils burning and some insect repellent on. We then continued north in the morning on absolutely beautiful weather, and we trolled and had some more success with some mackerel. And when we proceeded to an anchorage at the Franklin Islands for the night, we picked up a mooring buoy there. Basically, this was our last night at sea.